So I'm going to talk about what I'm considering the phase 2 of mobile. I think we're in another transition, which is pretty dizzying because we've gone through endless amounts of transitions in the past 7 years. The introduction of free-to-play into our industry has left many of our heads spinning, and I want to talk a bit about that and talk about what's going to happen next. Now, touching on what Tommy's speech touched on, a lot of them, how many people here wake up every morning just eager to make a terrible game? Raise your hand, it's okay, you can do it. Yeah, no, absolutely none of us, but the challenge that we've been experiencing for the past years is, as an industry, we have lost our internal compass for what good even means anymore. We are deeply divided as creatives between what good means when talking about free-to-play. And the little party game that I invite you all to play tonight over dinner is open up your phones, look at the top grossing list. I've put one up here, and ask everybody at the table, what's the best game on that list? What are the good games on the list? What are the bad games on the list? And I guarantee you that people have exceedingly different opinions about some of the games on this list as to whether they are good or not. And that division comes from sort of a lack of understanding of what matters as a developer. Now, whenever we get lost in a creative business, I try to look to other creative businesses to understand how they think about things, because we're a fairly new industry. And in this case, I want to look to the theater, which is 3,000 years old. Might know a few things. Paula Vogel, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, says that an audience, when it interacts with a new art form, goes through 3 phases. The first is that they are naive. They don't know any of the rules. So you can imagine when an audience first interacted with melodrama, their response was to go, "What? The butler did it? Oh, no, I can't believe it," right? They're discovering the rules of this medium. And then over time, when they get exposed to enough of that medium, they become sophisticated. They start to understand the rules, and they start to have specific tastes about what they want out of that medium. And then eventually, the audience gets to the point where they know the rules of that medium so well that creators can just play on little bits to trigger the audience. They know exactly what it means, and at that point the audience has become decadent in their understanding of the medium. The example I give you is you're watching a movie and somebody's got a screwdriver in their hand and the camera closes in on them putting it in their pocket. As a decadent film watching audience member, what do you know? Somebody is getting stabbed with that screwdriver later, right? You know it because you've seen so many movies, you know what that means. So using this lens to understand what's going on in our industry helps in a lot of ways. In one way it helps is understanding the difference between what's going on in the Asian free-to-play mobile market and what's happening here, which is that they are frankly just further along than we are in terms of their understanding of mobile free-to-play. Because in the various Asian markets, Korea, Japan, China, they've been playing mobile free-to-play games longer than we have for quite some time. So that explains part of the difference, part of the difficulty of bringing their games over to the West and bringing our games over to their markets. And an example, we're still fairly early in our phase and are about to move from phase 1 into phase 2, from naive to sophisticated, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you could actually understand that they're moving now fully into decadent. And the example I give is the largest game in China right now is this game right here, Fantasy Westward Journey. Now, this is a fully functional MMO on mobile. I'd like you to imagine Michael Pachter's wife playing this game on her mobile device, right? This is, the Candy Crush audience hopping in there. Now, I've cheated a little bit, by the way. This is a PC screenshot. But, it is actually a fully functional MMO that people are playing mobile, and it's taken off like a shot. Audiences in video games have, every cycle in every platform, gone from naive to sophisticated to decadent. We're now a very decadent console game audience. But I want to talk about a couple of those transitions very quickly. And they have gotten faster and faster as our industry has gone on. So from Space War, which we talked about earlier, to Pac-Man, that was an 18-year transition from what I would say the most primitive arcade-ish game to starting to get sophisticated with Pac-Man. In console, you'd go from Combat, the very first console game, to a more sophisticated game with Super Mario Bros., an 8-year transition. In mobile free-to-play, the very first mobile free-to-play with microtransactions game was 5 years ago in action, the action genre, Eliminate from DNA. And within 5 years, we have our Marvel Contest of Champions, which is now the highest grossing action game in free-to-play in the West. That's a very fast transition from nobody knowing the rules of mobile free-to-play action games to actually now having a fairly sophisticated game, a fairly sophisticated audience. But by comparison, if you look in the Chinese market, the very first mobile free-to-play game, so remember, 5 years ago is when we first had in-app transactions, right? And that's only on iOS, and it's 3 years ago on Google Play. We were really early. Whereas the first mobile free-to-play with in-app transaction game in China is Mobile Pet from Lingtone. That was 2001. So from there to Dota Legends, a huge title, is a 13-year transition. So this is an audience that is way, way more sophisticated than we are in their expectation of what these games are. So we have essentially just finished up what I'm calling phase 1 of mobile free-to-play, where, frankly, the reason why we're so divided as an industry is because we have two extremely conflicting definitions of good. And the parties, which I would call the red team and the blue team, have been duking it out at GDC, at events like this. You heard some of the uncomfortable laughter when Alf was asking us about whether microtransactions are good. Some people in this industry are not comfortable with free-to-play and have not been comfortable with free-to-play, and we fight about it still, and that is because we've been in two camps, really. And let's talk about the first camp. So the first camp got into this free-to-play business using the established laws of good as video game makers. So what is a quality video game? Well, it's a game that's immersive. It's a game that is high fidelity. It's a game where the players make interesting choices using the Sid Meier postulate. It's a game that has lots of features. Sort of back of the box, more features means a better game, right? And finally, it's a game that you can judge its quality based on its Metacritic score. How many of you, because I think we've got a lot of executives here, how many people have been in the room at some point in your company and somebody asks, what is the Metacritic score for free-to-play? Because I've been in that meeting like 17 times. And the answer is there isn't a Metacritic score for free-to-play. But as an industry, we've gotten so used to the idea that there would be some perfect measure that would tell you exactly whether the audience thinks it's good or not. We've tried to transfer that logic. So that was Camp 1, and frankly, Camp 1 kind of lost round 1. A lot of companies made some really kind of traditional games, got them onto mobile, put them for free, and they didn't climb up the charts. Well, Camp 2 could best be described, first Camp 1's the Metacritic camp, Camp 2 could be described as the metric camp, right? The metric camp, going back to theater, follows the Hamlet quote, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, which is, well, I don't know what good is, but I can tell if it's good or not based on the numbers. So if it has a D1 retention of 40% and an ARPU of 10 cents, let's call that good, right? That's a fine definition. And if you decide that good is defined by numbers, what happens? You ultimately end up promoting behaviors in development that are about driving numbers. So if you do something in the game and it makes one of those numbers go up, you have made a good game. And that means that in phase 1, we did all kinds of things to habituate user retention, such as energy mechanics, such as harshly gated play to make the user come back constantly. We used hard gates to require people to spend money because that would make the ARPU go up. And we frankly made games that were primarily benefiting the largest spenders. And there was an attitude that many of us have seen or experienced, and this would be a cause of conflict, where essentially it was, well, there's the very highest spenders and nobody else matters. And we kind of heard Michael Pachter talking about that when he was joking with Alf, that this is sort of this conflict and that maybe the new Amazon plan will open this up. And Alf referred to it as well. This is the camp that one can largely say has won phase 1, because the games that are driven by metrics have been the most successful. And why have they been the most successful? Because they're the ones that stay on the charts, they're the ones that generate the money, and that has been primarily what's ended up being defined as good in phase 1. Well, okay, so how did we get there that this sort of highly metrically driven definition of good ended up being kind of the dominant mode creatively? When talking creatively about a video game in the mobile free-to-play space, he kind of looked foolish if you wanted to go back to the old ways and talk about Metacritic. I would laugh at you in a room. Well, we got there because received enough feedback from the marketplace as game makers that we didn't really know anything. So for instance, if you look at Gung Ho, they say essentially their success with Puzzles & Dragons was random. They just got lucky. It's impossible to predict, their CEO has said. Angry Birds, of course, we know it's a famous story that took 50 tries to make that one hit. You have to just keep trying and trying and trying. We have the famous story of Farmville, where they say it took them 5 weeks to make the game and then release it. And by the way, they thought it was going to take them 8, and they just got lucky and were able to do it in 5 weeks. Right? In our example at Kabam, under Andrew's leadership, the biggest hit that company made ever was based on a previous game. It was made in 3 months, and it took off like a rocket ship, right? So this sort of promoted the idea across the industry that you have to just keep trying lots of stuff. It is impossible to predict success in this business. So get against the wall and see what sticks has certainly been my attitude. Like, who knows, is it going to be lucky or not? And the reason why, going back to that framework, I think this turned out to be the truth is because we as game makers, not just our audience, we as game makers were in the naive phase. We didn't know the difference between a good mobile free-to-play game and a bad mobile free-to-play game, so we have spent the past 5 years discovering it together with our audience. So that leads us into phase 2, where now we're starting to see real sophistication from the audience. We are absolutely in the midst of this transition. And I think what we're going to see, and the sort of Kabam's hypothesis and what we're chasing after, and what I think several people are, is that our market is going to start emerging into a much more sophisticated free-to-play audience member. And so to answer your question, yes, I think the closest one that it's going to look like will be the Korean market. So this is Netmarble's game Raven, where it's extremely high-fidelity game that is at its core a free-to-play title, but it also has, really taps into a core gamer's impulse in free-to-play mobile. So I think the common traits of successful games in Phase 2 mobile will be that they will have much better graphics than we've had in the past. People are going to be willing to download much bigger files. They will have a lot more varied gameplay. And, kind of critically, they will actually be fun at any level of spending. And I'm going to talk about why in just a moment. But I think that these will be 3 really critical facts, and it actually touches on many of the presentations we've heard today. Why is this going to emerge? Well, the audience has definitely, and I can prove it, become more sophisticated. They are more savvy and more demanding. And the way that we can measure this is in the basic brute universe of user acquisition. When you are going and trying to get an audience member to install one of your games, you can understand the funnel as first you get somebody to click on an ad on Facebook. The thing that happens then is they go to the landing page on Facebook. Now you can imagine, on the App Store. Now you can imagine splitting the audience members into 4 buckets at that point. There's the people who get to the landing page and go, nope, and bounce immediately. There's the people who read all of the description of the product and go, nope, and bounce much later. There's the people who, the second they get to the landing page, click and install it. And there's the people who read everything and then install it, okay? So you could imagine the less sophisticated kind of marketplace is one where people just sort of show up and leave instantaneously or show up and install instantaneously. And that used to be most of the marketplace. So most of the people you'd get to the landing pages would just quickly install or quickly walk away based on a single screenshot. What's happening now is those other 2 buckets are getting much bigger than they used to be. People are really examining the title to decide whether this is the particular game that they want. Another example of this is, it used to be if you were blessed with nice featuring from our friends at Google or our friends at Apple or any other store, you would kind of be able to guarantee about the amount of installs you were going to get based on the position of your icon. Didn't kind of matter what the game was. You were going to get about that many installs. Genre is now having a massively larger influence on how many installs you're going to get. It's also having a massively larger influence on how many people are going to install the game when you acquire them through user acquisition, how cheap your acquisition will be and not. Visuals are having a much bigger influence than ever. Video is having a much bigger influence. It's had a staggering influence in user acquisition and has radically lowered cost. Players are watching videos to decide, is that a game that I actually want to play? And so the point is, the consumer has become much more sophisticated, much more picky about what game they want to play. And then once they get into the game, they're much more picky about what they think is good or bad in it, and they're being much more vocal about it. I'll talk about a couple examples of that. So in this new marketplace where the consumer has gotten much more sophisticated, it requires that the makers of games also cease to be naive. It requires that the makers of mobile free-to-play games are also sophisticated. So it calls for a world in which we as developers have fewer, more focused bets made by people who love mobile and love free-to-play. And I'm going to repeat those again. Love mobile and love free-to-play, right? That you cannot be somebody who has distaste for free-to-play and go try to push it to your consumer. Why? Because the players don't hate free-to-play. If you hate free-to-play and your players don't, you're way out of sync, right? They've got sophisticated tastes about it. You need to have them too. So in phase 2, what's going to be defined as a good product will be those that are, at their heart, free-to-play games and mobile games, built from the ground up to be a mobile experience. This was true in phase 1. Just we didn't quite understand it yet. But in phase 1, absolutely, if your game felt like it was a console game, it just wasn't going to work. If your game was sort of rejecting how free-to-play works, it just wasn't going to work. But what's happening more and more now, because your consumers, your players, are playing more games than you, is that they're on to all of the ways that you used to make free-to-play work that were calculating seeming. So phase 2 is also going to be defined as an utter rejection of the sort of calculating tricks that a lot of people had distaste for in phase 1. What do I mean by that? Well, in phase 1, you'd have things like an energy mechanic, right? Who here loves energy mechanics? Huh? Come on, you love them. No, you don't. You get the lightning bolt, right? You get 10 out of 10 of those. Well, the consumer now sees that. The player sees that and says, you've just put that there because it's like a free-to-play thing. Stop it. I hate that, right? They don't, unless it feels like it's part of the game, they reject it because they're savvy, because they've played every single free-to-play game ever and they know exactly what you're up to. It actually goes to Kevin's talk earlier. They release Halo and they have one day where they're the best players because their players play more than them, and that's having free-to-play because the games are free, so these players know everything. But the biggest thing that's going to define phase 2 is long-term social engagements. Really actual social engagements where players are in alliances together, where they're talking to each other constantly, where they're discussing what they think is good about the game, what they don't think is good about the game, and this is what's going to drive so much of their interaction with you as a game maker and their sophistication. The players who are in alliances together, just think about this. They're in teams together, and you're having a free-to-play mechanic. So what are they discussing? It used to be that people were ashamed of spending money in the games, or they hid it, et cetera. People talk about it now all the time. Just join the alliance of any game. Hey, how much have you spent on this game? Oh, I spent this. Was it worth it? No. Was it worth it? Yes. Which do you want people saying? Right? Did you get a good experience when you spent the money? Yeah, actually, it was really cool. That's what you want to have saying. This is what's changing so much. Users are talking constantly about their relationship with the game, both as a piece of fun and as a work of commerce. So the biggest things that are going to be hallmarks of making sophisticated free-to-play games and what will be sophisticated mobile free-to-play gamers is that they are deeply aware of the old free-to-play tropes, and if they feel like they're part of a game and there's a good reason for them, they're cool. And if it feels like it's just tricks or manipulation, they don't think it's cool and they want you to stop it. They are deeply skeptical of clones because they've played everything. If you make a game that's like Smash of Slans, right, they are going to know that it's just Clash of Clans, and they're going to say, hey, I already played Clash of Clans a lot. This game doesn't interest me anymore. The most interesting trend that's emerged for us is that the spenders, particularly the highest spenders, are growing extremely protective of the non-spenders. So again, think about this. People are in alliances together. They're playing together constantly. They're aware of each other's economic conditions. I'm in an alliance with a bunch of guys who don't know whether I work at Kabam on Marvel, and they talk about their jobs together, right? And they talk about who can spend money and who can't spend money. And if they feel like the game is weighted in such a way that it's unfair to the people who aren't spending money, they will be mad at you, and they will say so. And that will be the spenders doing that. And finally, the community is consistently rejecting obvious pay to win. What emerged in the Asian markets over time as their audience grew more sophisticated is that the consumers began to understand that there were the people who were going to play an enormous amount, and there were the people who were going to spend money. And the games are so good at giving those people the ability to compete with each other based on which thing they put in, that the time had actual value in comparison to the money. And this is emerging as well in the sophisticated tastes of our audiences in the West. So some ways that we've put this new sophistication into work, and not instantaneously, some of this is based on learning over time at Kabam. When we started Marvel Contest of Champions, the core idea of it was you are going to become the ultimate Marvel champion. This was our #1 slide when releasing it. It was really about you and your personal mission to collect a whole bunch of Marvel superheroes and be awesome. Over the past 9 months, as we've made it, we realized that the social element of the game was incredibly important. We released alliances for the first time about 3 months after we released the game, and it radically turbocharged the game. People loved being able to talk to each other as teams, and we barely had any features promoting the alliances, by the way. It was just the fact that they could be in an alliance with other people just radically changed the game. So our most recent release, we added this ability for a whole alliance to fight together against Ultron. And they are planning together, and they're sitting together and go, okay, you guys go down the left lane. We've taken some of the best elements of MOBA and we've put it into our fighting game, and it's yet again had a big impact on the game because it's a way that this social unit actually works together, and they love doing it every single day. And people can do it at various different levels of playing. Somebody who plays 8 times a day can be just as useful in this mode as somebody who plays 800 times a day. Another example is our Star Wars game. From the ground up, it was built as a cooperative game, both with alliances and also the ability for people to play together. And players are deeply affectionate of this, right? This is a main thing they talk about all the time. Like, oh, I want to play with somebody else. It's a 2 to 4 player co-op. You don't have to do it, but it's something that people seek each other out, and it's something we're going to continue to invest in time. But the most kind of, I think, interesting one is our Star Wars game is based a lot on a game that we made called Spirit Lords. And when we released Spirit Lords, there was an obvious energy mechanic with the lightning bolt and stuff like that. And the players were like, this is lame. It's just stupid free to play. Why do you have that in there? And I don't mind that you want me to come back multiple times, but this just doesn't make sense in the world of the game. So with Star Wars, we created this different mechanic where you collect members of your crew, and you're able to send your crew out on missions. But of course, the missions take time for them to do, and they then have to come back, and you have to come back to redeem what they did for you. So it creates a kind of energy mechanic, but it's deeply embedded in the world of Star Wars. It feels cool in Star Wars, either going and running missions for you and collecting cool stuff, and this has been really warmly embraced by the players since we released last Wednesday. So in summation, I'll actually have time for questions. Yes! We are now firmly in phase 2 of mobile free-to-play here in the West. We are at the point where we have a sophisticated audience that we're trying to address, which means we as developers of mobile free-to-play have to ourselves become sophisticated. That means throwing spaghetti against the wall won't work anymore. Trying out a whole bunch of different things, just pushing them out. User acquisition is too expensive, the market is too crowded. You actually have to make something that is genuinely a good product in order to succeed now. The old, obviously tricksy monetization engagement tricks just simply won't work anymore. The players are rejecting them. You need to deeply embed the way people want to spend money into the fun of the game. It actually has to be compelling to spend money, much like the most obvious example would be the way Hearthstone does that based on Magic the Gathering, right? Magic the Gathering, people have spent an enormous amount of money for years on. It is a microtransaction business. Very few people complain about the fact that it's a microtransaction business because they understand it feels like it's part of the fun, the collection. And finally, you and your teams have to know and love free-to-play and how it works and be okay with the fact that it exists because your players do. They've accepted it. They're no longer arguing with the idea of free-to-play. And finally, your designers had to, in phase 1, learn free-to-play. They had to understand free-to-play, whether it was grudging or not. But now in phase 2, your product managers, the folks who drive analysis and drive how systems are geared, they have to learn gameplay because the players understand gameplay. They have to understand what's good gameplay and what's bad gameplay and what is actually creating enjoyment for the players because players have much less patience now for mediocre gameplay.